You ever notice how the Romans built empires, roads, aqueducts, and monuments that still stand today? Yet the thing nobody talks about is how advanced they were in something far more practical: gardening. Not decorative gardening, not hobby gardening, but full-on agricultural engineering. And here's the part most people overlook. A lot of their food growing techniques were so efficient, so resourceful, and so scientifically ahead of their time that even with today's tools, modern farmers still struggle to match some of the results. I'm not exaggerating. I've tested a few of these old methods myself. And when they're done right, they deliver in ways that modern optimized systems don't. So in this video, I'm breaking down 10 Roman gardening secrets that weren't just clever, they were borderline genius. And by the end, you might start questioning whether we've really advanced as much as we think. Now, this isn't one of those generic Romans grew olives and grapes lists. These are specific, documented methods, some forgotten, some rediscovered, some still superior, used by a civilization that fed millions using nothing more than observation, ingenuity, and relentless experimentation. Let's get into it. If you've ever tried extending a growing season naturally, without greenhouses or heaters, you know it's not easy. But the Romans mastered it centuries before electricity existed. Their approach? They engineered microclimates, artificial pockets of warmth, humidity, or airflow optimized for specific plants. And unlike today's plastic tunnels or electric heaters, everything they built was passive. Zero energy input. Romans used stone walls, terraced rock beds, and sun-facing slopes to trap heat during the day and release it slowly at night. This created a stable temperature zone that protected delicate crops like figs, peaches, and early vegetables long before frost dates. They even oriented garden walls to catch maximum sunlight: south-facing for heat-loving plants, east-facing for early warming, west-facing for wind protection. Think of it as a natural version of thermal mass heating. I've replicated this technique in modern trials using stone-lined beds and small retaining walls. And let me tell you, the temperature difference is real. On cold nights, these stone structures can keep the soil several degrees warmer than open ground. And unlike greenhouses, there's no plastic to replace, no maintenance, and no risk of overheating. Just physics and stone. It's one of those primitive techniques that's actually more sustainable than half the technologies we rely on today. If you've ever experimented with microclimates yourself, I'd love to know what worked for you. Drop it in the comments. You'd be surprised how much the community learns from each other. Everyone talks about compost now, like it's some revolutionary idea. But the Romans were practicing large-scale soil regeneration long before it had a name. Their version wasn't just compost, it was a sophisticated blend of green manure, animal bedding, crushed plant material, and sometimes even lake sediment or marsh muck. They didn't just throw organic matter on the soil, they engineered fertility. Writers like Vero and Pliny the Elder documented how farmers plowed living cover crops directly into the fields to rebuild nitrogen and organic matter. They preferred plants like vetch, lupin, and clover, not because they sounded good on the list, but because they tested them over hundreds of harvest cycles. They even categorized which soils benefited from which plants, something modern guides rarely go into detail about. And here's where the Romans were particularly clever. They didn't waste manure. They composted it with straw, leaves, and food scraps, then aged it until it mellowed into a cold, nutrient-rich soil amendment. If you've ever dealt with hot manure burning your plants, you know exactly why the Romans aged it. They understood soil biology long before soil biology had scientific terminology. When I tested a version of this Roman green manure blend, using modern equivalents like vetch, clover, and broad beans, the soil structure improved dramatically within one season. Better tilth, better moisture retention, and noticeably more earthworms. It's not glamorous, but it works. And it's another example of Romans using long-term thinking instead of quick fixes. When most people think of Roman engineering, they think of aqueducts carrying water across valleys and mountains. But what impresses me more is how efficiently they used that water once it arrived. Roman gardens didn't rely on constant flow or wasteful flooding. Instead, they used a combination of underground clay pipes, slow-release channels, and gravity-fed cisterns to deliver steady, controlled moisture directly into the root zone. No hoses, no pumps, just pure hydrodynamics. The trick was in the simplicity. They built narrow trenches lined with clay or stones that released water slowly over hours instead of minutes. In dry regions, they buried their irrigation channels, reducing loss from evaporation. Some states even used porous amphipots, the ancient version of modern Alya irrigation, to maintain consistent soil moisture with almost no waste. These alas seeped water only when the soil was dry, responding to the plant's actual need. It's a water-saving method so effective that many regenerative farmers today are bringing it back. I've tested Alya-style irrigation in my own plots, and the results speak for themselves. Plants stay healthier, root systems grow deeper, and you end up using around 50 to 70% less water. That's not an estimate, that's what the measurements show. And Romans figured this out thousands of years before drip irrigation became a product line. If you've ever tried alas or any low-tech irrigation hacks, share your experience. It helps others more than you think. Here's a secret even experienced gardeners overlook. The Romans were obsessive about crop spacing. But not in the modern sense of 5 inches here, 10 inches there. Their method was based on what I call functional spacing. They grouped plants by root competition, canopy behavior, and airflow, long before these things became common agricultural terms. Instead of planting in tight, uniform rows, Romans often used staggered or diamond-shaped layouts. These patterns gave each plant equal access to light and minimized shadow competition. They also reduced fungal risk by increasing airflow at ground level, something today as monoculture systems constantly struggle with. Roman writers like Columella noted that planting too close together wasn't just inconvenient. It forced plants into war with one another, and he was right. When plants compete, they put more energy into survival than production. When they have space, they thrive. In my trials, recreating Roman staggered spacing increased yields on certain crops, especially leafy greens and legumes, by up to 20 to 25%. Not because the plants grew taller, but because they grew healthier and suffered less disease pressure. It's one of those low-tech techniques that completely changes the game once you try it. And by the way, what's the most successful spacing pattern you've used? I'm curious because every region has its own quirks. If you've ever planted fruit trees, you know the waiting game. Years pass before you get your first harvest. Romans didn't have that kind of patience. They developed a method called ring planting, where they dug wide circular trenches around saplings, filled them with nutrient-rich compost, mulch, and heat-absorbing stones, and then built a slight slope directing water toward the roots. This did 3 things at once: supercharged soil fertility, giving young trees immediate access to nutrients; improved water delivery, preventing runoff and ensuring deep soaking; naturally warmed the soil, allowing trees to break dormancy earlier in the season. Some estates even surrounded saplings with low stone rings, essentially primitive heat batteries. Those stones absorbed sunlight during the day and radiated warmth at night, keeping root zones from getting too cold. Modern growers use heat mats and tree collars for similar effects, but the Roman version costs nothing and lasts forever. In one of my own trials, I surrounded a young fig tree with a stone ring and compost trench inspired by Roman descriptions. The tree leafed out earlier than the control trees and started fruiting noticeably sooner. It doesn't work for every species, but for heat-loving trees, it's a measurable advantage. Most people think crop rotation is a modern scientific practice, but the Romans were already doing it systematically, intelligently, and at a scale that still impresses agricultural historians. Their preferred rotation wasn't just grain, legumes, fallow. It was a 3-part regenerative cycle that balanced soil nutrients, restored organic matter, and prevented long-term soil fatigue long before synthetic fertilizers existed. The sequence usually followed this pattern: an exhaustive crop like wheat or barley, followed by a restorative legume like vetch or broad beans, and then a fallow or grazing period where livestock enriched the soil naturally. This wasn't guesswork. Roman farmers tracked which soils became tired, which plants returned nitrogen, and how long land needed to recover before producing again. Some wealthy estates even kept written records across generations documenting how rotations affected yields. And here is the part modern farmers still struggle with. Romans integrated animals into the system instead of separating them. Livestock grazed fields after harvest, dropping manure exactly where it was needed, effectively closing the nutrient loop. When I experimented with a variation of this Roman cycle on small test plots, the soil structure improved noticeably faster than with straight legume rotations alone. That grazing period, yes, even with a small flock or limited manure, makes a real difference. The Romans weren't perfect, but they understood something modern agriculture often forgets. Exhausted soil isn't a technical issue, it's a biological one. Walk into a vineyard today, California, Italy, France, South Africa, and you'll find pruning systems that look suspiciously familiar if you've studied Roman horticulture. That's because Roman growers perfected vine training long before steel wires and trellises existed. Their method, called single-stem staking or arbustum training, involved tying vines to living trees or tall stakes and pruning them aggressively to force energy into fruit production rather than leafy excess. Writers like Cato and Columella were adamant. Vines must be pruned with courage, otherwise they waste resources on canopy instead of grapes. And here's where they were ahead of their time. The Romans understood that pruning wasn't just cosmetic. It was about regulating airflow, controlling sunlight exposure, and creating balanced tension between growth and restraint. Too little pruning and you get disease. Too much pruning and you shock the plant. Modern viticulture still teaches the same principles, just with different vocabulary. When I adopted a Roman-style training system on a test vine, one long fruiting arm, controlled laterals, and a single main stake, the plant produced fewer clusters, but each grape was larger, sweeter, and more evenly ripened. It's the same logic elite vineyards use today, only the Romans were doing it with wooden stakes and intuition. If you've ever pruned a plant too hard or too lightly, you know exactly why this matters. It's one of the oldest lessons in horticulture and still one of the most valuable. Before permaculture had a name, the Romans were already doing it. They didn't call them guilds or syntropic layers, but their gardens were built around strategic plant communities, combinations of herbs, shrubs, vegetables, and trees that supported one another. Olive orchards were often planted with legumes to fix nitrogen. Fruit trees grew alongside aromatic herbs like rosemary, sage, and thyme, which discouraged pests. And vineyard floors were sometimes sown with low, creeping plants that reduced erosion while keeping moisture near the surface. What's remarkable is that these weren't random pairings. They were the result of centuries of observation. Romans recognized that certain plants liked growing near each other, and others didn't. They knew that onions suppressed some pests, that mustard could cleanse tired soils, and that beans could rejuvenate depleted land after cereals. These insights weren't mystical, they were practical. In my own experiments, pairing heat-loving Mediterranean herbs with fruit trees created a noticeable reduction in soil, temperature fluctuations, and a boost in pollinator activity. It's subtle, but subtle advantages add up. This is exactly how Roman estate managers thought. They weren't chasing maximum short-term yield. They were building gardens that sustained themselves. One of the most overlooked Roman secrets is their intentional use of biodiversity inside their growing spaces. Today, monoculture dominates agriculture massive fields of a single crop stretching for miles. Efficient for machinery? Sure. But biologically? It's one of the weakest systems you can build. Romans didn't have tractors, so they didn't build farms around machines, they built them around ecosystems. Their gardens blended vegetables, herbs, flowers, shrubs, fruit trees, and root crops together, not randomly, but with purpose. The Romans recognized that diversity stabilizes soil. Different root structures aerate at different depths. Different leaf shapes intercept sunlight at different angles. Different scents attract beneficial insects or repel pests. It wasn't plant everything everywhere. It was a balanced mix designed to create natural cycles of pest resistance, moisture retention, and nutrient cycling. Some estate owners even wrote about how mixing crops reduced the chance of total loss in bad seasons. If one plant failed, others filled the gap. In my test plots, mixed beds always outperform monocultures in long-term soil health and resilience. You get fewer pest spikes, fewer fungal outbreaks, and more consistent production across seasons. The Romans didn't know the microbiology behind it, but they understood the results. They designed gardens as ecosystems, not factories. And that's a lesson modern agriculture is slowly relearning. This last secret ties everything together, and honestly, it's the one that impressed me the most when I first started studying Roman horticulture. Roman gardens, whether they were small household plots or massive villa estates, weren't laid out randomly. They were engineered, almost like architectural blueprints. Paths, beds, walls, slopes, water access, shade, windbreaks, all strategically placed to reduce labor and multiply efficiency. Let me explain how smart this was. Romans oriented vegetable beds along sun paths, so crops got the most predictable light throughout the year. They planted tall crops on the northern edge to avoid shading the shorter ones. They built low walls or hedges in windy regions to protect delicate plants. They placed compost pits downhill where runoff naturally carried nutrients. And they always organized gardens so the most frequently harvested areas were closest to the kitchen or storage areas. That's workflow design, something modern backyard gardeners often overlook completely. And here's another layer: their gardens were beautiful. They believed form and function should support each other. Practicality didn't have to be ugly. A lot of modern gardening tries to separate productivity and aesthetics, but the Romans blended them seamlessly. It's one of the reasons their villas still inspire designers today. When I recreated a Roman-style layout in one of my test areas, some aligned beds, central paths, slight grading for drainage, the difference in both convenience and output was immediate. Less wasted motion, fewer microclimate issues, better overall productivity. The Romans weren't just growers. They were planners. And that gave them an edge we still underestimate. When you look at all 10 of these Roman gardening secrets side by side, a clear pattern emerges. The Romans didn't grow food the way we often do today, chasing bigger yields at the expense of soil, water, and long-term stability. They built systems. Systems that regenerated themselves, systems that used the landscape instead of fighting it, and systems designed to make food production reliable, not fragile. Their microclimates extended seasons. Their compost and green manures rebuilt soil for generations. Their irrigation methods delivered water slowly and precisely. Their pruning and spacing techniques weren't guesswork but centuries of trial and refinement. And their diverse planting and garden layouts turned every inch of land into a functional, efficient, almost self-balancing ecosystem. If there's one takeaway from all of this, it's that ancient knowledge isn't outdated, it's underappreciated. These techniques are quiet, subtle, and often slower than modern shortcuts. But they work. And the results speak louder than any marketing pitch or modern gadget ever could. Because at the end of the day, the soil doesn't care about trends. Plants don't care about hype. Nature responds to principles, not products. And the Romans understood those principles on a level most of us rarely stop to appreciate. Before we wrap up, here's the final expert truth bomb I want you to remember. The most powerful technology in gardening has always been observation. The Romans didn't have microscopes or moisture sensors. They watched how water moved across land. They tracked how plants responded to shade and heat. They noticed which combinations thrived and which ones failed. And if you adopt that same mindset, slow down, watch your plants, learn from them, you'll start to see your garden differently. You'll notice things most people miss, and your results will show it. If you want to dive deeper into any of the techniques I mentioned, I've listed some helpful resources, books, and replaceable items in the description. Nothing salesy, just tools and references I've personally used or tested. And if you've tried any Roman-inspired methods yourself, or you have your own hidden gems from experience, share them in the comments. This channel isn't just about teaching it, it's about building a community of growers who care about doing things the right way. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and check out the next video on the channel. And remember, you don't need fancy equipment to grow like a master. You just need the right knowledge and the patience to apply it.